The cowboy's weathered hands shook as he counted the bodies again, desperate to find he had miscounted. But the herd that had numbered 73 strong just yesterday morning now lay scattered across the parched Colorado earth like broken promises, and only one steer still stood on trembling legs while the rest had already begun their journey to dust. Dalton Ingram pulled his hat from his head and wiped the sweat from his brow with a sleeve that had long ago turned the color of the prairie. The August sun of 1883 beat down mercilessly on the land just south of Loveland, Colorado, turning everything it touched into a furnace. He had driven his herd from Wyoming, hoping to reach the railhead before the drought took hold, but the sickness had swept through them faster than wildfire through dry grass. First one cow had stumbled, then another, then whole groups at once until the morning had brought this nightmare made real. The ranch he had mortgaged his future to buy seemed like a distant dream now. Without this herd, without the money their sale would bring, he would have nothing. Worse than nothing, he would have debts that would follow him to his grave. At 24 years old, he had thought himself a man ready to build an empire from hard work and determination. Now he stood in the middle of that dying dream and wondered if he had the strength to even walk away from it. The lone standing steer lowed pitifully, a sound that cut through Dalton's heart like a blade. He approached the animal slowly, speaking soft words that felt hollow in his mouth. The steer's eyes were glassy, its breathing labored. It would not last through the day. Dalton turned away, unable to watch anymore. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, brown and cracked, with only sparse vegetation clinging to life. A line of cottonwoods marked where a creek should have been running, but even those trees looked skeletal and defeated. He had camped here because water was supposed to be reliable, but the creek bed held only cracked mud and the memory of better times. He needed to think, to plan, but his mind felt as parched as the land. The nearest town was Loveland, perhaps 6 miles north, but what help could he find there? A veterinarian might diagnose what killed his herd, but it would not bring them back. The bank would want their money regardless of his circumstances. The world did not pause for one man's tragedy. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that might have been beautiful under different circumstances, Dalton heard something that did not belong in this landscape of death. A voice, clear and melodic, carrying across the empty prairie like water over stones. He turned, searching for the source, and saw a figure approaching from the east, leading a paint horse and singing as she walked. The woman appeared to be around his own age, perhaps a year or two younger, dressed in a simple traveling dress that had seen its share of dust and miles. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her face. But it was her voice that held him transfixed. She sang an old hymn he remembered from his childhood, but the way she sang it transformed the words into something more than religion, something that spoke of hope and continuity and the stubborn persistence of life itself. She stopped when she saw him standing among the dead cattle, her song trailing off mid-verse. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the distance, two people alone in a vast and unforgiving landscape. Then she tied her horse to one of the cottonwoods and walked toward him with purpose in her stride. "I saw the buzzards circling," she said by way of introduction. Her voice was lower when she spoke than when she sang, with a slight roughness that suggested someone who had learned to be practical about the world. "I thought someone might need help." Dalton gestured at the carnage around them. "Unless you can raise the dead, there is not much help to be given here." She walked past him, crouching beside one of the fallen cows. Her hands moved over the animal with practiced confidence, examining eyes and mouth and the swelling of the belly. "How long ago did the first one fall?" Yesterday afternoon. By nightfall I had lost 20. This morning brought the rest of them down. He heard the defeat in his own voice and hated it. And you watered them from the creek. She stood and walked to the dry creek bed, kneeling to examine the cracked earth. What little was left of it. The water was low and had a strange smell, but I thought it better than nothing. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. Bad water can kill faster than drought. Something upstream must have fouled the source. Probably a dead animal decomposing in what is left of the water. The poison concentrates as the creek dries up. Dalton felt a fresh wave of despair wash over him. So I killed them myself by trying to keep them alive. You did what any drover would do, she said, returning to stand before him. In the fading light he could see her face more clearly now. She had strong features, not delicate but handsome in their own way, with eyes the color of creek stones and a mouth that looked like it knew how to smile but had not had much cause recently. My name is Fiona Devereux. I am a traveling veterinarian, trained by my father before he passed. A woman veterinarian. The words came out before he could stop them, and he immediately regretted the surprise in his tone. She raised an eyebrow. The animals do not seem to mind. And I notice your herd did not fare particularly well under masculine care. He deserved that. Dalton Ingram, and you are right. I have made a mess of things thoroughly. How many are still breathing? He pointed to the lone standing steer. Just the one, but it will not last much longer. Fiona walked to the animal, circling it slowly while making soft clicking sounds with her tongue. The steer's ears twitched toward her. She reached out and let it smell her hand before touching its muzzle, then worked her way along its body, feeling and observing. This one has a chance. It did not drink as much of the bad water, probably because it is younger and lower in the pecking order. Got pushed away from the water source by the bigger cattle. A chance. Dalton heard something dangerous stirring in his chest. Hope was a cruel thing to feel when everything lay in ruins. If it makes it through the night, it will likely recover. The poison has to work its way through the system, but it will be a hard night. She looked up at him, and he saw understanding in her expression. You lost everything here, did you not? He could not speak, only nodded. Then let us try to save what can be saved. She returned to her horse and began pulling items from her saddlebags. I have some herbs that might help, and more importantly, I have clean water. But mostly what this animal needs is to not be alone. Cattle are herd animals. When they are isolated and sick, they give up. They need to know something is alive and present with them. What are you suggesting? She met his eyes directly. I am going to sing to your steer all night long. I am going to sit right here and let it know that the world has not ended, that life continues, that there is still something worth standing for. And you are going to help me keep it on its feet when it tries to lie down, because if it lies down, it will not get back up. Dalton stared at this strange woman who had appeared like an answer to a prayer he had not known how to pray. Why would you do this? You do not know me. This is not your loss. No, it is not my loss, Fiona agreed. She began mixing herbs from various pouches into a small amount of water, creating a paste. But I am tired of riding through this country and seeing only death and defeat. I am tired of arriving too late to help. For once, I would like to arrive in time to make a difference. Even if it is only one animal, even if it seems like a small thing against all this loss. She gestured at the dead herd. Sometimes the act of trying is enough. As darkness fell over the prairie, Fiona began her vigil. She coaxed the steer to take some of the herbal mixture, smearing it on its gums when it would not drink. Then she settled herself on the ground nearby, close enough that the animal could see and hear her, and began to sing. She sang hymns and folk songs and ballads. She sang songs Dalton recognized and ones he had never heard. Her voice rose and fell like waves on a distant shore, sometimes strong and clear, sometimes soft and gentle. The steer's ears turned toward her constantly, tracking her presence. And Dalton found himself doing the same, drawn to that voice like a compass to true north. Hours passed. The stars emerged in their countless multitudes, indifferent and eternal. The night air cooled, bringing some relief from the day's brutal heat. Twice the steer's legs buckled and Dalton rushed forward to support it, holding it upright while Fiona sang encouragement, her voice never faltering. The animal was heavy, dead weight against his shoulder, and his muscles screamed with the effort of keeping it standing. But each time, after long minutes of struggle, the steer found its feet again and stood on its own. Around midnight, Fiona paused in her singing to drink water and rest her voice. In the sudden silence, the prairie sounds emerged, the distant yip of coyotes, the rustle of wind through dry grass, the creak of saddle leather as the horses shifted. "Where were you traveling to?" Dalton asked, his voice rough from disuse. "Nowhere in particular, everywhere in general." Fiona smiled slightly. "My father and I used to travel together, going from ranch to ranch, treating animals. After he died 6 months ago, I continued on. I do not know what else to do. I cannot imagine settling in one place doing something else. It must be lonely." "It is," she admitted. "But it is also free. No one tells me where to go or what to do. No one expects me to be something I am not." She looked at him across the small space that separated them. "What about you? This was going to be your stake, your beginning." "I worked other men's ranches since I was 14, Dalton said. The words came easier in the darkness, as if the night could absorb them without judgment. "Saved every dollar I could. When the ranch outside Loveland came up for sale, I borrowed the rest and bought it. 300 acres, a decent house, good grazing land. Or at least it was good before the drought. I was going to sell this herd, pay down the loan, and start building something that was truly mine. And now I have a ranch I cannot afford, a debt I cannot pay, and 72 dead cattle that will probably cost me money to dispose of properly." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I would have been better off staying a hired hand." "You cannot know that." Fiona's voice was firm. "You took a chance. That takes courage. The fact that bad luck struck does not erase that courage or make the trying worthless. Courage does not pay debts." "No," she agreed, "but giving up guarantees failure. At least trying gives you a chance." Before he could respond, the steer groaned and its legs wobbled again. They both moved instantly, Dalton supporting its weight while Fiona checked its vital signs. "Still fighting," she announced. "That is good. That is very good." She began singing again, this time a lullaby in French that Dalton did not understand, but that seemed to soothe the suffering animal. The steer's eyes closed, and for a moment Dalton feared they had lost it, but its breathing continued, steady and regular. It was resting, not dying. The night stretched on. Dalton found himself listening not just to Fiona's songs but to the person behind them. She chose each song carefully, matching the melody and rhythm to the steer's condition. When it grew agitated, she sang something upbeat and energetic. When it calmed, she sang something slower, more peaceful. It was not just singing, it was communication, a dialogue between her and the animal that transcended words. As dawn began to paint the eastern horizon in shades of pink and gold, Fiona's voice finally showed signs of strain. She had been singing for nearly 10 hours with only brief breaks. But she did not stop, pushing through the fatigue with determination that Dalton found himself admiring deeply. When the sun broke fully over the horizon, bathing the prairie in morning light, Dalton walked around the surviving steer, examining it with new eyes. Its breathing was stronger, more regular. Its eyes had lost some of their glazed quality. It was still sick, still weak, but it was undeniably more alive than it had been 12 hours ago. "It is going to make it," he said, wonder creeping into his voice. Fiona's song trailed off. She stood slowly, stiffly, her body protesting the long night on the hard ground. "Yes," she said simply. "It is." They stood there in the early morning light, two dusty, exhausted people who had fought death to a standstill and somehow won. Without thinking, Dalton crossed the distance between them and pulled Fiona into a hug. She stiffened for a moment, surprised, then relaxed and returned the embrace. She smelled of herbs and horse and something else, something essentially her that he could not name but found himself wanting to know better. "Thank you," he said into her hair. "Thank you for stopping. Thank you for trying. Thank you for caring about one animal when the world would say it is not worth the effort." She pulled back enough to look up at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed from fatigue, her face drawn, but she was smiling. "You are welcome, but the night is not over yet. We saved one, but you were counting wrong in your despair." Dalton frowned. "What do you mean? Come with me." She led him through the field of dead cattle, and as the morning light grew stronger, he began to see what he had missed in yesterday's horror and today's darkness. Scattered among the dead, barely visible unless you looked carefully, were other cattle standing on shaking legs or lying down but clearly breathing. Fiona moved from one to another, checking pulses and pupils, and a dozen other signs Dalton did not understand. Finally, she straightened and turned to him with an expression of tired triumph. 12. You have 12 survivors. They all drank less of the bad water for various reasons. They all made it through the night, and with proper care they will all recover. Dalton felt his knees go weak. He sank to the ground, his head in his hands, and to his shame felt tears burning in his eyes. 12. Not one, but 12. Not enough to replace what he had lost, but enough. Enough to start over, enough to not lose everything, enough to have hope. Fiona sat down beside him, her shoulder touching his. 12 is a good number, she said softly. In the Bible, 12 is the number of tribes, the number of apostles. It is a number of new beginnings. How can I ever repay you for this? You can start by helping me with these animals. They are going to need careful tending for the next few days. And then you can buy me breakfast in Loveland, because I have not eaten since yesterday morning, and I am starving enough to eat a horse. Though please do not tell my mare I said that. That surprised a laugh out of him, rough and unexpected. You would stay, keep helping. I have nowhere else to be. She met his eyes. And I would like to see this through. I would like to know that the story does not end here in this field of death but continues on to something better. Over the next 3 days, Dalton and Fiona worked side by side to care for the surviving cattle. They moved them to a different location, away from the contaminated creek, and Dalton rode into Loveland to purchase fresh water and supplies while Fiona stayed with the animals. When he returned, he found her sitting in the middle of the small herd, singing softly while the cattle rested around her like children around a mother. The sight stopped him in his tracks. The cattle were watching her with what could only be described as trust, their ears forward, their bodies relaxed. She had somehow, impossibly, bonded with these animals in a way that went beyond mere veterinary care. She had made them feel safe. That night, camped under the stars with the cattle bedded down nearby, Dalton and Fiona finally had time to talk properly. He built a fire and Fiona produced supplies from her seemingly bottomless saddlebags, creating a meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee that tasted better than anything Dalton could remember eating. "Tell me about your father," he said as they ate. "How does a veterinarian's daughter learn to do what you do?" Fiona's expression grew distant, touched with sadness but also warmth. My mother died when I was 8. After that, it was just Papa and me. He could not leave me behind when he went on his calls, so I went with him. At first I just watched, but I was curious and asked questions, and he loved to teach. By the time I was 15, I was assisting him with everything. By 18, I could handle most cases on my own. Did he approve of you continuing his work? He insisted on it. She smiled at the memory. On his deathbed, he made me promise not to give it up just because the world would tell me I should. He said I had a gift, and gifts were meant to be used, not hidden away to make other people comfortable. He sounds like a wise man. He was, and stubborn, and kind. She looked at Dalton over the fire. What about your family? Are they in Colorado? Dalton shook his head. My parents died in a cholera outbreak when I was 13. I have a sister in St. Louis, married with children of her own. We write occasionally, but we are not close. She wanted me to come east, learn a trade, become respectable. I wanted this. He gestured at the prairie around them. Open space, freedom, the chance to build something with my own hands. And you still can, Fiona said. 12 cattle properly managed can become a herd again in a few years. It will take time and work, but it is possible. If the bank gives me that time, then we will have to convince them. She said it so matter-of-factly, as if she had already decided this was her problem too, not just his. We, Dalton repeated carefully. Fiona held his gaze. If you want my help, you have it. I told you I have nowhere else to be, and I find I am curious to see how this story ends. Something warm unfurled in Dalton's chest. I would like your help. I would like that very much. On the 4th day, they drove the 12 surviving cattle into Loveland. It was slow going, as the animals were still weak and needed frequent rest. But by afternoon, they had them penned at the stockyard on the edge of town, with a promise from the yardmaster to keep them fed and watered while Dalton sorted out his business. The banker, a man named Horace Pemberton with mutton-chop whiskers and a permanent expression of disapproval, listened to Dalton's story with increasing skepticism. "Let me understand this correctly," he said when Dalton had finished. "You lost 73% of your herd to poisoned water, and you expect me to extend your loan based on the survival of 12 animals." "Not just survival," Fiona interjected before Dalton could respond. She had insisted on accompanying him to the bank, and now Dalton was grateful for her presence. "Recovery. Those 12 cattle are healthy and strong now. They represent quality stock that weathered a disaster. That shows resilience, good bloodlines. And 12 cattle can become 100 in a few years with proper management." Pemberton's expression suggested he did not appreciate being lectured by a woman. "Miss, I appreciate your optimism, but the bank deals in realities, not possibilities. Then let me give you some reality." Fiona leaned forward, her voice sharp as a blade. "Dalton Ingram has 300 acres of good ranch land. The drought will not last forever. When the rains return, that land will be valuable. If you foreclose now, you will have to find a buyer in a market where everyone knows the previous owner failed. You will be lucky to recoup half the loan value. But if you extend the loan, give Mr. Ingram time to rebuild, you get all your money plus interest. The question is whether you have the vision to see past immediate circumstances to future profit." The banker's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Dalton had to suppress a smile. "Furthermore," Fiona continued, "I am a trained veterinarian. I am prepared to work with Mr. Ingram to rebuild his herd. With professional animal care, the recovery time will be significantly reduced. You will not be waiting 10 years for your money." Pemberton looked at Dalton. "Is this woman your wife?" "No," Dalton said, "your business partner." Dalton glanced at Fiona, who gave him the slightest nod. "Yes," he said, "my business partner." The banker was silent for a long moment, drumming his fingers on the desk. Finally, he sighed. 6 months extension on the loan payment, that is all I can offer. If you cannot make a significant payment by then, we will foreclose. It was not generous, but it was something. Thank you, Dalton said. We will not disappoint you. Outside the bank, Dalton turned to Fiona. Business partner, he asked. She shrugged, but he could see the smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It seemed like a persuasive argument in the moment. Unless you object, I do not object. He surprised himself with how much he meant it. But if we are partners, we should formalize it, draw up papers. Make it official. Tomorrow, Fiona said. Tonight, I believe you owe me a meal that is not beans cooked over a campfire. They found a restaurant that catered to ranchers and drovers, simple but clean, and ordered steaks with all the trimmings. As they ate, Dalton found himself watching Fiona, studying her in the lamplight. She had washed the trail dust away and changed into a cleaner dress, and he realized with some surprise that she was beautiful in a way he had not fully appreciated before. Not in the delicate, fragile way of society women, but with a strength and vitality that drew the eye and held it. You are staring, she observed without looking up from her meal. I am grateful, he corrected. 5 days ago, I had lost everything. Tonight, I have a partner, a plan, and 12 cattle that might as well be worth their weight in gold. 6 months is not very long, Fiona warned. We will have to be smart and work hard. I am used to hard work, and I am beginning to think you are the smart part of this partnership. She did look up then, meeting his eyes with an intensity that made his breath catch. Do not sell yourself short, Dalton Ingram. You had the courage to dream in the first place. That counts for more than you know. They returned to the ranch the next day, driving the cattle slowly ahead of them. The ranch house was small but solidly built, 2 rooms downstairs and a loft above. It had sat empty for the weeks Dalton had been on the trail, and dust covered everything. But the roof was sound, the windows unbroken, and the stove still worked. It needs a woman's touch, Dalton said, then immediately felt awkward. I mean, it needs anyone's touch. It has been neglected. Fiona walked through the space, her practiced eye assessing and cataloging. It is a good house, strong bones. Some cleaning, some curtains, maybe some paint when we can afford it. It will be fine. She turned to him. Where should I sleep? I assume you have been using the main bedroom. He had not thought that far ahead. You take the bedroom, I will sleep in the loft. That is not necessary. I am accustomed to sleeping rough. The loft will suit me fine. They stood there awkwardly, both trying to be considerate, neither wanting to impose. Finally, Fiona laughed. We are being ridiculous. We just survived the worst week of both our lives together. I think we can figure out sleeping arrangements without terminal politeness. You take the bedroom since your things are already there. I will take the loft. If either of us becomes uncomfortable with the arrangement, we will discuss it. Agreed. Agreed. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Dalton worked on repairing fences and outbuildings that had fallen into disrepair, while Fiona tended the cattle and began treating animals for neighboring ranchers who had heard about the woman veterinarian, who had saved 12 cattle from certain death. The extra income from her veterinary work helped stretch their meager resources. Evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the prairie, talking about everything and nothing. Dalton learned that Fiona loved thunderstorms and hated tea, that she could read Latin but could not carry a tune in a bucket when she was not actively healing something, that her favorite color was the exact shade of blue the sky turned just before full dark. Fiona learned that Dalton had once wanted to be a teacher, but could not afford the education, that he was left-handed in a world made for right-handed people, that he had never been in love and was not entirely sure he would recognize it if it happened. I think you would recognize it, Fiona said one evening, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. "How can you be sure?" "Because love is not subtle. It does not creep up on you unnoticed. It arrives like a summer storm, sudden and powerful and impossible to ignore." Dalton looked at her profile, silhouetted against the dying light. "Have you been in love?" "Once, or I thought I was." She was quiet for a moment. "I was 19. He was a rancher's son, charming and handsome. He said he loved me, said he did not care that I was unusual, that I worked alongside my father. But when it came time to actually marry me, he could not do it. His family expected a traditional wife, and he was not strong enough to stand against them. I am sorry. Do not be. It taught me something important. Love is not just feeling strongly about someone. It is also having the courage to choose them, even when that choice is difficult." She turned to look at him. "Real love is brave." As September turned to October, the drought finally broke. Rain fell in sheets, transforming the prairie from brown to green almost overnight. The creek filled, running clear and cold, and the land seemed to exhale with relief. The 12 cattle thrived, growing sleek and healthy, but more than the land was changing. Dalton found himself watching for Fiona's smile, listening for her voice, finding excuses to work near wherever she was working. When she laughed, it felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. When she was away treating animals on neighboring ranches, the house felt empty and wrong. He was falling in love with her. Perhaps had already fallen, that first night when she had appeared out of the twilight singing hope into his despair. The realization terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. One evening in late October, after a particularly good day where Fiona had been paid handsomely for saving a rancher's prize bull, Dalton decided he could not keep silent any longer. They were sitting on the porch as usual, watching the stars emerge one by one. "Fiona," he said, his voice rough with nerves, "I need to tell you something." She turned to him, her expression curious. "What is it?" He had rehearsed this in his head a dozen times, trying to find the right words. But now, faced with the moment, all his prepared speeches fled. "I am in love with you," he said simply. "I do not know when it happened exactly. Maybe that first night, maybe slowly over these past months. But I know it now, and I cannot keep pretending I do not feel it." Fiona's eyes widened, but she did not look away. "Dalton, I do not know what to say." Fear clutched at his heart. "If you do not feel the same, I understand. We can remain partners, friends. I will not make things awkward, but I had to tell you. You said real love is brave, and I want to be brave enough to tell you the truth." "Stop talking," Fiona said, but she was smiling. "You are brave, braver than my rancher's son ever was." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm against his. "I have been in love with you for weeks, you fool. I kept waiting for you to notice, to say something. I was starting to think I would have to hit you over the head with it." Joy and relief flooded through him. "You love me. I love you." She said it firmly, clearly, as if making a vow. "You are good and kind, and you work harder than anyone I have ever met. You have dreams, but you are also practical. You treated me like a partner and an equal from the beginning, never once suggesting I should be anything other than what I am. How could I not love you?" Dalton cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. "May I kiss you? If you do not, I might have to hit you after all." He kissed her there on the porch under the Colorado stars, and it felt like coming home to a place he had never been, but had always been searching for. She kissed him back with an enthusiasm that made his head spin and his heart race. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fiona was laughing. "What is funny?" Dalton asked. "Nothing, everything. I am just happy." She leaned her forehead against his. "I did not think I would ever feel this way. After my father died, I thought I would just drift forever, alone and useful, but never truly connected to anything. And then I found you standing in a field of dead cattle looking like the end of the world, and somehow it became the beginning of mine." They sat together long into the night, making plans and dreaming dreams. Dalton proposed marriage and Fiona accepted, though she insisted they wait until the ranch was on more solid financial footing. "I will not have anyone saying I married you for security," she explained. "When we marry, it will be because we choose each other, not because we need each other." "I do need you," Dalton protested. "We need each other," she corrected. "That is different. That is partnership. That is love." As winter approached, they worked tirelessly to prepare. Fiona's veterinary income had been steady, and they had been frugal, saving every penny they could. In November, Dalton made the first payment to the bank, smaller than the original amount owed but significant enough to show good faith. Pemberton, the banker, accepted it with grudging approval. The 12 cattle had grown strong, and in the spring they would breed them, beginning the slow process of rebuilding the herd. It would take years, but they had time. More importantly, they had each other. Christmas came, and Dalton surprised Fiona with a gift he had been working on in secret, a sign for the ranch gate, beautifully carved with the name she had suggested. 12 Standing Ranch, it read. ESD. 1883. Fiona cried when she saw it, happy tears that she wiped away impatiently. "It is perfect," she said. "It tells our story." "Our story is just beginning," Dalton said, pulling her close. They married in January of 1884 in a simple ceremony at the church in Loveland with a handful of neighbors as witnesses. Fiona wore a new dress that Dalton had insisted on buying, deep green like the prairie after rain, and she carried wildflowers that had somehow bloomed despite the winter cold. Dalton wore his best suit, brushed and pressed until it looked almost new. The minister asked if they would love and honor each other, forsaking all others, and they both answered with clear, strong voices that carried their certainty. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Dalton kissed his bride with joy that felt too large for his body to contain. That night, in the bedroom that was now truly theirs, they came together with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies with the same care and attention they brought to everything else in their partnership. Fiona sang softly as they made love, wordless melodies that wound around them like a blessing, and Dalton thought he had never heard anything more beautiful. Spring of 1884 brought renewal in every sense. The prairie bloomed with wildflowers, a riot of color that seemed to celebrate the end of the drought. The 12 cattle were bred, and by summer, Fiona confirmed that all had taken. They would have calves by the following spring, the beginning of the new herd. More than that, in May, Fiona discovered she was pregnant. Dalton's reaction was pure joy mixed with terror. "I do not know how to be a father," he confessed. "And I do not know how to be a mother," Fiona replied. "But we will figure it out together, the same way we have figured out everything else." As her pregnancy progressed, Dalton insisted she reduce her veterinary work, worried about her health. Fiona rolled her eyes at his concern, but agreed to take on only cases close to home and to let him accompany her on calls. They made a good team, Fiona with her medical knowledge and Dalton with his strength and practical skills. In February of 1885, in the middle of a snowstorm that blanketed the prairie in white, Fiona went into labor. The midwife from Loveland could not make it through the storm, so Dalton was left to assist his wife through the delivery, guided by her instructions even as she gritted her teeth through the contractions. "You do this with animals all the time," she gasped between pains. "A human is not so different." "You are not an animal," Dalton said, his voice shaking with fear. "You are everything to me. If something goes wrong and I lose you, I do not think I could survive it." "You will not lose me," Fiona said fiercely. I have survived too much to let childbirth take me down. Now stop being afraid and help me bring our child into the world." 14 hours later, as the storm began to clear and the first rays of dawn painted the snow pink and gold, their son was born. He came into the world screaming his indignation at the cold air, with a shock of dark hair and strong lungs that promised he would never be ignored. Dalton held his son for the first time and felt something break open in his chest, a love so overwhelming it brought tears to his eyes. "He is perfect," he whispered. "He is loud," Fiona said, exhausted but smiling. "He gets that from you." They named him Daniel after Dalton's father, with the middle name of Pierce after Fiona's father. Daniel Pierce Ingram, born into a world of hope and hard work and love. As the years passed, 12 Standing Ranch prospered. The original 12 cattle multiplied, their calves growing strong under Fiona's expert care. By 1888, they had a herd of 65, and Dalton was able to make the final payment on the ranch loan. The day he walked out of the bank as the full owner of his land, Fiona met him on the street, and they danced right there, not caring who saw them. Daniel grew into a bright, curious boy who loved following his mother on her veterinary calls and helping his father with the ranch work. In 1887, they had a daughter, Emily, who had her father's eyes and her mother's determination. And in 1890, another son, Thomas, who arrived early and small but fought his way to health with a tenacity that made his parents proud. Fiona never stopped her veterinary work, though she was more selective about which cases she took as the children came. She became known throughout the region as the best animal doctor in Colorado, and her opinion was sought on everything from cattle to horses, to the occasional exotic animal brought through by traveling shows. Dalton expanded the ranch, purchasing adjacent land when it became available, always careful not to overextend as he had in the early days. He learned from his mistakes, became more cautious and thoughtful in his planning. But he never lost his willingness to take calculated risks when the opportunity was right. On their 10th anniversary, in January of 1894, they stood together at the fence line watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of amber and rose. The children were inside with a neighbor woman who had agreed to watch them for the evening. It was a rare moment of quiet in their busy lives. "You ever regret it?" Dalton asked. "This life, this place. You could have gone anywhere, done anything. Instead, you stayed here with me." Fiona leaned against him, fitting perfectly under his arm as she always had. "I chose exactly the life I wanted. I chose you." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the dying light. "That night when I found you in that field, I was so lost. I did not know it then, but I was searching for something to anchor me, some reason to stop drifting. You gave me that. This ranch, this family, this life we built together. It is everything I never knew I needed." "I was the one who was lost," Dalton said. "You saved me. You saved my cattle, my ranch, my future. And then you saved me, the man, by loving me. We saved each other." Fiona reached up to touch his face, her hand warm against his cheek. "That is what love does. It transforms loss into possibility. It takes broken things and makes them whole." They kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Two people who had found each other in the midst of disaster and built something beautiful from the ruins. Behind them, the ranch house glowed with lamplight, and inside it, their children laughed at some shared joke. Ahead of them, the prairie stretched endless and full of promise. In the spring of 1895, Dalton stood in the pasture counting the herd as he did every year. 143 cattle now, from the 12 that had survived that terrible August day so long ago. He had started with a field of death and built a thriving ranch. He had started alone and desperate and found a partner, a wife, a family. Daniel, now 10 years old, came running up to him. "Papa, Mama says supper is ready, and she made your favorite pie." Dalton ruffled his son's hair. "Tell her I will be there in a moment." The boy ran off, and Dalton took one more look at the herd. He could still remember that night, Fiona's voice singing over dying cattle, keeping hope alive when everything seemed lost. He could still remember the morning they had found 12 standing when he had expected to find only one. He could still remember falling in love with the strange, fierce woman who had refused to give up. 12 had become 143. One had become 5. Despair had become joy. It was more than he had ever dreamed possible on that terrible day when his herd had died in the dust. He walked back to the house where lamplight spilled from the windows, and his wife's silhouette moved in the kitchen, and his children's laughter rang out clear and sweet. This was his herd now, this family, more precious than any number of cattle, and they were all standing strong. The years continued to unfold in patterns of work and joy, challenge and triumph. By 1897, 12 Standing Ranch had become one of the most respected operations in northern Colorado. Dalton's reputation for quality cattle spread, and buyers came from as far as Denver to purchase his stock. Fiona's veterinary practice had grown to the point where she took on an apprentice, a young man from Loveland named Samuel who had the patience and dedication the work required. But it was not all smooth sailing. In the spring of 1898, a late blizzard caught them unprepared, and they lost 15 head of cattle to the cold and snow. It was devastating, but nothing like the loss Dalton had experienced 15 years before. This time he had Fiona beside him, and together they weathered the setback and moved forward. Daniel showed an aptitude for working with animals that made Fiona proud. By the time he was 13, he was assisting her on complicated cases, his hands steady and his manner calm. Emily, meanwhile, revealed a head for numbers and business that astounded both her parents. At 11 years old, she was helping Dalton keep the ranch accounts and suggesting improvements to their operations that actually worked. Thomas, the youngest, was the dreamer of the family. At 8 years old, he loved stories and songs and spent hours listening to his mother sing. He had her voice, that rare gift of making music that could touch something deep in the soul. In the fall of 1899, as the century drew to a close, a newspaper reporter from Denver came to write a story about successful ranches in Colorado. He spent 3 days at 12 Standing, interviewing Dalton and Fiona, watching them work, talking to their children and neighbors. The resulting article, published in the Denver Post in December, painted a picture of the ranch and its owners that was both accurate and romanticized. It told the story of the herd dying in the dust, of the woman who sang over them all night, of the 12 cattle standing in the morning. It spoke of hard work and determination, of partnership and love, of building something from nothing. "You make us sound like heroes," Dalton said when he read the article. "You are heroes," the reporter had replied. "Not the kind that fight wars or conquer empires, but the kind that matter more. The kind that build families and communities. The kind that refuse to quit when everything is against them. That is heroism too." The article brought unexpected attention. Letters arrived from people across the country, some asking for advice, some simply wanting to say the story had inspired them. A few marriage proposals even came for Fiona, from men who apparently had not read carefully enough to note she was already married. These Dalton and Fiona laughed over together, using them as kindling for the fire. As the new century dawned in 1900, the Ingram family celebrated with their neighbors, marking not just a new year but a new era. The Wild West of Dalton's youth was fading, being replaced by something more settled and civilized. Railroads crisscrossed the country now. Telephones connected distant towns. The world was changing faster than anyone could have imagined, but some things remained constant. The prairie still stretched endless under the Colorado sky. Cattle still needed tending. The seasons still turned their eternal wheel. And at 12 Standing Ranch, a family still worked and loved and grew together. In the summer of 1902, Daniel turned 17 and announced his intention to study veterinary medicine formally, perhaps even attend the new veterinary school in Iowa. Fiona's pride was evident in every line of her face. "Your grandfather would have been so proud," she told him, her eyes bright with tears. That same summer, Dalton took Fiona on a trip she had long dreamed of but never thought possible. They left the children in the care of trusted neighbors and traveled by train to San Francisco, spending 2 weeks exploring the city and the coast. It was Fiona's first time seeing the ocean, and Dalton would never forget the expression on her face as she stood on the beach and watched the waves roll in. "It is like the prairie," she said, "endless and powerful and full of mystery, but wet." She laughed and kicked off her shoes, wading into the surf with the unself-conscious joy of a child. They walked the beach hand in hand, collected shells, ate fresh fish, and made love in a hotel room with windows that overlooked the bay. It was a second honeymoon, a celebration of nearly 20 years of marriage and all they had built together. On their last night in San Francisco, as they sat on the hotel balcony watching the sun set over the Pacific, Fiona turned to Dalton with a serious expression. "I need to tell you something." His heart clenched with sudden fear. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right, actually, perhaps more right than I expected." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "I am pregnant again." Dalton stared at her, processing the information. They had thought their family was complete, had not expected another child. Fiona was 39 now, and he knew the risks that came with late pregnancy. But looking at her face, seeing the mix of joy and nervousness there, he felt his own joy rising to meet hers. "We are going to have another baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have another baby," she confirmed. "Are you happy?" He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I am terrified and thrilled and so deeply happy I do not have words for it. How are you feeling? Should we go home early?" "You should not be traveling in your condition. We should have stayed home. What was I thinking bringing you all this way?" "Dalton," Fiona's voice cut through his spiraling worry. "Breathe, I am fine. Pregnant women have been traveling and working and living their lives since the beginning of time. I am a doctor, remember. If I were in any danger, I would tell you. Promise me you will be careful." "I promise." She kissed him softly. "We have been through so much together. We will get through this too." The pregnancy was harder than her previous ones, as they had both feared it might be. Fiona tired more easily and had to cut back further on her veterinary work. But she remained strong and determined, refusing to be treated as fragile. In March of 1903, she gave birth to twin daughters, a surprise neither of them had anticipated. The birth was difficult, lasting 26 hours and requiring the midwife to call in the doctor from Loveland. For a while, Dalton feared he would lose Fiona, and the terror of that possibility made him physically ill. But she fought through, stubborn and strong as always, and brought 2 tiny girls into the world. They named them Grace and Hope, because Fiona said those were the qualities that had sustained them through their hardest times. Grace had Fiona's dark hair and Dalton's blue eyes. Hope had Dalton's lighter coloring and Fiona's gray eyes. They were perfect and terrifying, and more loved than Dalton had thought it was possible to love. Daniel, now nearly 18 and preparing to leave for veterinary school, proved himself an invaluable help with his infant sisters. Emily, at 15, took on more responsibility around the ranch, managing aspects of the business with a competence that amazed everyone. Thomas, at 13, wrote songs for his baby sisters and sang them to sleep when they were fussy. The family dynamics shifted and settled into new patterns. The house that had once seemed spacious now felt comfortably crowded, full of life and noise and love. Dalton added on 2 more rooms, giving the girls a nursery and providing Emily with her own space, since she was growing into a young woman who deserved privacy. As the twins grew, their personalities emerged distinct and complementary. Grace was quiet and thoughtful, content to sit for hours watching birds or clouds or the patterns light made on the floor. Hope was restless and energetic, always moving, always exploring, always asking questions. Together they were a force of nature, getting into everything and charming everyone they met. In 1905, Daniel graduated from veterinary school and returned to 12, standing to join his mother's practice officially. The sign outside the office now read, Devereux and Ingram Veterinary Services. And father and daughter worked together with an easy partnership that made Dalton proud every time he saw it. Emily, at 17, had caught the attention of several young men in the area, but she showed no interest in settling down. "I want to go to Denver," she announced one evening at supper. "I want to learn business properly, maybe even attend university. There are schools that accept women now, Papa. I could learn accounting, business management, all the things that would help the ranch." Dalton's first instinct was to say no, to keep his daughter close and safe. But Fiona squeezed his hand under the table, a silent reminder to let their children follow their dreams as they had followed theirs. "If that is what you want, we will make it happen," he said. Thomas, at 15, was beginning to make a name for himself as a singer. He performed at church socials and town gatherings, and people came from miles around to hear him. "I want to travel," he said. "Like you did, Mama, before you met Papa. I want to see the country and share music with people." The thought of his children leaving, pursuing their own paths, filled Dalton with bittersweet emotion. He was proud of them, wanted them to reach for their dreams, but he would miss them terribly. The house would feel empty without their presence. "We did not raise them to stay children forever," Fiona reminded him when he voiced these thoughts. "We raised them to be strong and independent and capable of making their own way in the world. That they want to spread their wings means we did our job well." In the fall of 1906, Emily left for Denver to attend business school. Thomas began traveling with a small troupe of performers, singing at venues throughout Colorado and Wyoming. The house felt suddenly quiet with only Daniel, who now lived in the small cabin they had built near the barn, and the 6-year-old twins still at home. But life at 12 standing continued its rhythms. The ranch was now one of the largest in the region, with over 300 head of cattle and a reputation for quality that extended across multiple states. Dalton, at 47, was still strong and capable, though he felt the years more than he once had. His hair was gray at the temples now, and there were lines around his eyes that had not been there before. Fiona, at 43, had aged gracefully, her beauty evolving from youthful prettiness to something deeper and more compelling. Her hands were weathered from years of work, her face lined with sun and laughter. She moved more slowly than she once had, careful of the joints that ached on cold mornings. But her mind was as sharp as ever, her dedication unwavering. On a warm September evening in 1907, Dalton and Fiona took a rare evening away from responsibilities, riding out to the place where they had first met. The exact spot was hard to identify after all these years, as the prairie had long since reclaimed it, but they found a place near the old dry creek bed and spread a blanket on the ground. 24 years, Dalton said, lying back to look at the stars emerging overhead. Has it really been that long? 24 years since the worst day became the best day, Fiona agreed, settling beside him and resting her head on his shoulder. Do you remember what you thought when you first saw me? I thought you were a mirage, a vision brought on by despair and sun sickness. No real woman would be walking alone across the prairie singing hymns. He turned his head to kiss her forehead. What did you think? I thought you were the saddest person I had ever seen. And I thought I had to help you, even though I did not know why. Something about you just reached out and grabbed hold of my heart. She was quiet for a moment. I did not know then that I would spend the rest of my life loving you, but I am glad that is how it turned out. I am more than glad, Dalton said. I am grateful every single day for the woman who appeared out of nowhere and sang life back into my dying herd, sang life back into me. They lay there for hours, talking and remembering, tracing the path that had led them from that terrible, wonderful night to this moment. They talked about their children, their hopes and fears for them. They talked about the ranch and its future. They talked about growing old together, about all the years still ahead of them. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, Fiona began to sing. The same hymn she had been singing that first evening, her voice carrying across the empty prairie just as it had all those years ago. And Dalton, listening, felt the same sense of hope and possibility he had felt then, the sense that as long as this woman was beside him, anything could be overcome. The years continued their march. Emily graduated from business school in 1908 and returned to 12 Standing, bringing with her new ideas for expanding and modernizing their operations. Under her guidance, they began selling directly to restaurants and hotels in Denver, cutting out middlemen and increasing profits. She also instituted proper bookkeeping systems that allowed them to track expenses and income with precision they had never had before. Thomas's music career flourished. By 1910, at 22, he was performing in theaters across the West, and there was talk of him recording his songs on phonograph cylinders. But he always came home between tours, drawn back to the ranch and family that had raised him. Daniel married in 1909, a kind woman named Sarah who shared his passion for animals. They built a house near his parents' property and began their own family. Their first child, a son they named Dalton after his grandfather, was born in 1910, making Dalton and Fiona grandparents for the first time. The twins, Grace and Hope, grew into lovely young women, different as night and day but inseparable. Grace wanted to be a teacher, spending hours tutoring children in Loveland. Hope wanted to be a rancher like her father, and she rode and roped with skill that impressed even the most skeptical cowboys. In 1912, Dalton turned 53, and the family threw a celebration that brought together friends and neighbors from across the region. Nearly 100 people gathered at 12 Standing, eating and drinking and dancing under strings of lanterns that turned the ranch yard into something magical. At one point in the evening, the crowd called for Fiona to sing. She protested, saying her voice was not what it once was, but they insisted. Finally, she stood and sang the old hymn, the one she had sung over dying cattle on an August night nearly 30 years before. Her voice was different now, deeper and richer with age, but still beautiful, still capable of reaching something fundamental in the human heart. As she sang, people fell silent, even the children, caught by the power of her voice and the emotion she poured into every note. When she finished, there was a moment of profound silence and then applause erupted, people clapping and cheering. Dalton stood and went to his wife, pulling her into his arms and kissing her in front of everyone, not caring who saw. "I love you," he said against her lips. "I have loved you since the moment you appeared singing hope into my darkness." "And I love you," she replied. "Today, tomorrow, forever." As Dalton entered his late 50s, he began to think seriously about succession planning. The ranch needed to continue after he was gone, needed to thrive for his children and grandchildren and all the generations yet to come. He called a family meeting in the fall of 1915 to discuss the future. All the children were present. Daniel with Sarah and their 3 children, Emily, who had never married but seemed content with her life, Thomas between tours, and the twins who were now 22 and making their own decisions about their futures. "I want to talk about what happens to 12 standing when your mother and I are gone," Dalton began. "Papa, you are only 56, Emily protested. "You have years left." "I hope so, but I am also practical. This ranch has been my life's work, and I want to ensure it continues in a way that honors what your mother and I built together while also allowing you all to pursue your own dreams." They talked long into the night, working out the details. Daniel would take over the veterinary practice entirely when Fiona was ready to retire. Emily would manage the business side of the ranch, handling sales and finances. Thomas would be a silent partner, receiving income but free to pursue his music career. The twins would each receive parcels of land to do with as they wished, whether that meant ranching or selling or leaving it wild. "What about the original 300 acres?" Hope asked. "The heart of the ranch. That stays intact," Dalton said firmly. "No matter what else happens, those original acres remain as 12 standing ranch. Daniel, as the oldest, will be the primary owner, but with the understanding that it belongs to all of you. This is your legacy." They all agreed, and papers were drawn up making it official. Dalton and Fiona felt a weight lift from their shoulders, knowing the ranch would continue after them. In 1917, the United States entered the Great War in Europe. Thomas, at 29, wanted to enlist, but Dalton asked him not to. "You are needed here," he said. "Your music brings joy in dark times. That is its own kind of service." Thomas stayed, and his music did bring comfort to a community worried about sons and brothers fighting far away. He performed at fundraisers for the war effort and at memorials for those who did not return. His gift for touching hearts with song became more valuable than ever. The war ended in 1918, and the country celebrated, but the celebrations were muted by the influenza pandemic that swept the globe. Loveland was not spared. Families fell ill, and the town rallied to care for its sick. Daniel and Fiona, as medical professionals, worked tirelessly treating both animals and people, since the doctor was overwhelmed and anyone with medical knowledge was pressed into service. Dalton worried constantly about Fiona, now 56, and pushing herself too hard. "You will make yourself sick," he told her. "People need help," she replied. "I cannot turn away from that just to protect myself." By God's grace, their family was spared the worst of the illness. They all fell sick at various times but recovered. Many in the community were not so fortunate, and the cemetery grew crowded with new graves. As the 20s dawned, bringing with them a sense of relief and renewal, Dalton and Fiona found themselves entering a new phase of life. They were grandparents 7 times over now, with Daniel and Sarah's 5 children and Emily's surprising marriage in 1920, to a businessman from Denver producing twin boys in 1921. Fiona retired from active veterinary practice in 1922, turning the business entirely over to Daniel while she focused on teaching and mentoring the next generation. She took particular joy in working with her granddaughters, teaching them about animals and medicine and the importance of following their passions. Dalton, at 63, finally allowed himself to step back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Hope, who had always wanted to be a rancher, took over management of the cattle operation, proving herself as capable as any man. Dalton spent his days as an advisor and elder statesman, offering guidance when asked, but trusting the younger generation to make their own decisions. In the summer of 1925, on their 41st wedding anniversary, Dalton and Fiona took another trip, this time by automobile to Yellowstone National Park. They camped under the stars and walked among the geysers and hot springs, marveling at the beauty of the land. "We should have done this years ago," Fiona said, watching Old Faithful erupt against a brilliant blue sky. "We were too busy building a life," Dalton replied. "But maybe that was the point. Maybe the life we built was more important than the adventures we might have had." "The life we built was an adventure," Fiona said. "Every single day of it." That night, lying in their tent with the sounds of the wilderness around them, Fiona turned to Dalton in the darkness. "Do you remember that first night, when I sang over your cattle?" "I remember everything about that night, the despair I felt, the sound of your voice carrying across the prairie. The moment I realized one steer was still standing, then finding there were 12. The hope that maybe all was not lost after all." 12 standing, Fiona mused. "We named the ranch for them, but they represented so much more than just surviving cattle. They represented possibility, the chance to start over, the gift of hope when everything seemed hopeless." "They represented you," Dalton said. "You were the one who stood when everything else had fallen. You were the one who sang life back into death. Those 12 cattle survived because you believed they could, because you sat with them all night and refused to let them give up." "We survived together," Fiona corrected. "All of us. The cattle, me, you. We were all broken and struggling, and somehow we found a way through. That is what I want our grandchildren to remember about us. Not that we were perfect or that everything was easy, but that we refused to give up, even when giving up would have been so much easier." Dalton gathered his wife close, feeling the familiar contours of her body against his, the warmth and solidity of her presence. They had been together 41 years now, had weathered droughts and blizzards and financial crisis and pandemics. They had raised 5 children and were now watching their grandchildren grow. They had built something lasting and true from the ruins of his dying herd and her rootless wandering. "I love you," he said into the darkness. "I have said it 10,000 times, but it never feels like enough. You are my heart, Fiona Ingram. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "And you are mine," she replied. "You gave me a home when I did not know I needed one. You gave me a purpose beyond just drifting from place to place. You gave me a family and a life and love that has sustained me through everything. If I had to go back and do it all again, I would not change a single thing." They made love that night under the stars, their bodies moving together with the practiced ease of long familiarity, but also with tenderness and passion that had not dimmed with the years. Afterward, they lay tangled together, listening to the night sounds and feeling perfectly content. The years continued to pass, bringing changes both welcome and difficult. Dalton's health began to decline in his late 60s, arthritis making it hard for him to ride or do the physical labor he had once thrived on. It frustrated him terribly, this betrayal by his own body. "I am becoming useless," he said one difficult day in 1928 when pain had kept him inside instead of working with hope on the ranch. "You are nothing of the kind," Fiona said sharply. She was 66 now, her hair completely gray, her face deeply lined, but her spirit remained strong. "Your value is not measured in how much physical labor you can do. You have wisdom and experience and love to offer. That matters more than being able to rope a steer." She helped him to the porch where he could at least see the ranch spread out before him, the cattle grazing peacefully, the horses running in the pastures, the grandchildren playing in the yard. "Look at what you built," she said softly. "All of this exists because you refused to give up on a dream, even when that dream seemed impossible. You created something that will last for generations. That is not useless." He took her hand, lacing his weathered fingers with hers. "What would I do without you?" "Fortunately, that is not a question you have to answer. I planned to stick around and annoy you for many more years, but fate had other plans." In the spring of 1930, Fiona caught a cold that settled in her lungs and would not clear. Pneumonia, the doctor said, and at 68, with a lifetime of hard work behind her, her body struggled to fight it off. They set up a bed for her in the main room of the ranch house, where she could see out the windows to the prairie she loved. All the children came home, gathering around their mother as she struggled for breath and strength. The grandchildren were kept away, too young to fully understand what was happening. Dalton sat beside her bed day and night, holding her hand, talking to her, sometimes singing the songs she had taught him over their years together. His voice was rough and uncertain, nothing like her beautiful singing, but she smiled when she heard him trying. "You finally learned to carry a tune," she whispered one evening, her voice barely audible. "I had a good teacher." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Please do not leave me. I am not ready to face the world without you." "You will never be without me," Fiona said. "I am in every part of this ranch, every memory we made together, every child and grandchild we created. I am woven into the fabric of your life so completely that you will carry me with you always." "It is not the same." "No," she agreed. "It is not, but it will have to be enough." She looked around at their children gathered in the room. "I am so proud of all of you. You have exceeded every hope and dream your father and I ever had. Promise me you will take care of each other, support each other. Promise me you will keep 12 Standing Ranch strong and thriving. Promise me you will tell your children and grandchildren about the 12 cattle that stood when all the others fell, and what that taught us about hope and persistence and love." They promised, tears streaming down their faces. That night, with Dalton lying beside her on the bed, holding her close as he had for 46 years, Fiona slipped away quietly. One moment she was breathing, and the next she was simply gone, as peaceful as falling asleep. Dalton held her for a long time, unwilling to let go, unable to believe that the woman who had been his partner and his love and his reason for everything was truly gone. Eventually, Daniel gently pulled him away, and the women prepared Fiona's body for burial. They held the funeral 4 days later, and it seemed like everyone in northern Colorado came to pay their respects. The church could not hold everyone, so they held the service outside under a brilliant blue sky. Thomas sang, his voice breaking with grief but still beautiful. Daniel gave a eulogy that had everyone crying. Emily read from Scripture. Hope and Grace spoke about their mother's strength and kindness, but it was Dalton's words, simple and raw, that people would remember. He stood before the gathered crowd, this man who had built an empire from 12 surviving cattle, and spoke from his broken heart. "Fiona came into my life on the worst day I had ever experienced," he said. "My herd was dead or dying, my dreams were dust, and I saw no path forward. And then I heard her singing, and everything changed. She sang hope into despair. She sang life into death. She sang love into a heart I had thought too damaged to feel it. Everything I am, everything I built, everything I love exists because she appeared singing on an August evening and decided my cattle were worth saving. She saved so much more than cattle that night." She saved me." He paused, fighting for composure. "She was the best person I ever knew. The strongest, the kindest, the most capable. She was a healer and a partner and a mother and a friend. The world is darker without her light in it, but I am grateful, so deeply grateful, for every day I got to love her and be loved by her. That gift is more than most people receive in a lifetime." They buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, where she could see the prairie stretching endlessly in all directions and watch over the land she had helped build. The marker reads simply, "Fiona Devereux Ingram, 1862–1930. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother." She sang life into death and love into being. The months after Fiona's death were the darkest of Dalton's life. He moved through his days mechanically, unable to find joy in anything. The ranch continued functioning because of his children, but he felt disconnected from it all, as if he were watching his life from a great distance. "You have to keep living, Papa," Emily said gently one day. "Mama would not want you to give up." "I know what she would want," Dalton replied. "That does not make it any easier to do." But slowly, painfully, he found his way back to life. He began spending more time with his grandchildren, telling them stories about their remarkable grandmother. He worked with hope on ranch decisions, his experience complementing her energy. He attended Thomas's performances and Emily's business meetings and Daniel's veterinary calls, taking pride in the adults his children had become. On the first anniversary of Fiona's death, in the spring of 1931, the whole family gathered at her grave. They sang hymns, the same hymns she had loved, and told stories about her. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Dalton stood alone at the grave for a few minutes. "I miss you every day," he said to the stone marker. "Every moment feels incomplete without you. But I am trying to keep going, to honor what we built together by protecting it and nurturing it. I hope I am making you proud. I hope wherever you are, you know how much you were loved, how much you are still loved." The wind picked up, rustling through the grass, and for just a moment, Dalton could have sworn he heard singing carried on the breeze. It was impossible, of course, just his imagination and wishful thinking, but it comforted him nonetheless. Dalton lived another 7 years. Years filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with the continued growth and success of 12 standing ranch, with the satisfaction of seeing his legacy secured. He moved more slowly as time passed, his body failing bit by bit, but his mind remained sharp until the end. He died in his sleep in March of 1938, at the age of 79, in the house he had bought nearly 55 years before. Daniel found him in the morning, lying peacefully in the bed he had shared with Fiona, a slight smile on his weathered face. They buried him next to his wife on the hill overlooking the ranch. The service was huge, 3 generations of family and friends gathering to honor a man who had built something lasting from nothing. But in the end, the words that mattered most were carved on his marker. Dalton Pierce Ingram, 1859–1938. Beloved husband, father, grandfather. His herd died in the dust, but 12 stood strong, and from them he built a legacy of hope and love. The ranch continued, passed down through the generations just as they had planned. Daniel ran it until his own death, then his children, then their children. The cattle business evolved and changed, adapting to new times and new challenges, but 12 standing ranch remained, a testament to 2 people who had refused to give up when everything seemed lost. And on quiet evenings when the wind blew across the prairie just right, people swore they could sometimes hear singing, a woman's voice carrying hope and love across the endless grass, reminding everyone who heard it that even in the darkest times, there was always reason to keep standing, keep fighting, keep believing in tomorrow. The story of the cowboy whose herd died in the dust, and the woman who sang over them all night, finding 12 standing in the morning, became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It was a story about survival and hope, about partnership and love, about building something beautiful from the ruins of disaster. But more than anything, it was a story about how two people, brought together by tragedy and chance, created something that transcended their individual lives. They built a family, a ranch, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. They proved that love, real love, the kind that stands beside you in the worst moments and refuses to let you fall, can transform everything. 12 cattle survived that terrible night in August of 1883. From those 12, hundreds more. From one desperate cowboy and one wandering healer, a family and a future neither could have imagined. From death and dust and despair, life and love and hope eternal. That was the true miracle of 12 Standing Ranch, the gift that Dalton and Fiona gave to each other and to all who came after them. Not just survival, but the promise that no matter how dark the night, morning would come. And in the morning, there would always be something left standing, something worth fighting for, something beautiful worth building.